Hey, Ari, thank you for coming in. Just a, really remarkable background you have as a consultant in academic excellence, NASA's National Science Olympiad to genetics at the University of Washington to, MIT prestigious entrepreneurship program to Alert Wire, building that, something acquired by a Microsoft subsidiary and working as a solution architect, leadership in tech finance, MR Financial, for example, entrepreneurship ventures, Aridan, FinCross International, global awards. Visiting professor at South Korea Yonsei University to founding FatRat.ai and Hyperion Labs and being a critical part of that, et cetera, et cetera. So just an amazing history of contribution and continuing. And you're still so young. So thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Sia. Appreciate it. I'm thrilled to be here with you. I'm a big admirer of yours since we first met.
So Ari, what were the three inflection points in your life that made you who you are today? And I just named the 1% of the, and there's 99% there that just all remarkable. What contributed to who you are today? And it could have been when you were 3 or 5 years old. It could have been a mentor. It could have been a family member. It could have been an early educational experience. It could have been challenges. For example, I just interviewed one gentleman just before this, and one of the inflection points in his life was being sent to prison for 30 years. That was an inflection point, and it completely transformed him, right? And his approach, and it's public, and right, because we just completed the interview, but that was a major inflection point. So it could be a challenge, or it could be opportunities, mentors, etc.
Wow, that's an interesting question. Um, I think I'd have to say I could. There's like three three events slash people that stand out in my mind. Obviously, I owe so much to my parents, especially my mom, for giving me the freedom to be a very unusual child and like fostering my unusualness versus sort of trying to suppress it. But I would say first and foremost would me meeting my oldest and dearest friend, Dr. Dennis Lee. I met him when I was 12. We were actually competing in a chess competition against each other, and it was just one of those things that happens in life that it's difficult to explain. We sat down; it was our first time really interacting ever, and before the game even started, we just started chatting, and I realized he was just like a much calmer, more reserved, and of course Korean version of myself. And we decided before the game even started, we didn't even want to play the game. We didn't even want to be in competition. Our coaches were really unhappy about this, but we literally, I don't know if you know in chess that you push both on the timer, you push both sides to freeze time. We wouldn't even start. We just like got up and left and just went out and started talking. This back at Washington State, and that began like a lifelong friendship with just one of the most remarkable humans that anybody could ever be sort of blessed to know. So that was meeting him was a turning point. We have been partners and best friends. We taught together at Yonsei. He's the one that suggested to the dean that they bring me over. He's just one of those unbelievable people. He speaks like 10 languages, and just really can. Is just somebody that I have an enormous amount of admiration and respect for, and he's helped sort of guide my life and my choices in a lot of ways. So I was like early on, and then later on, I was skipping ahead. My two children. I just can't even express what a shift of awareness that having children like triggered. Like they're like kids are like brutally efficient at exposing the things that matter to you, and they sort of shift your entire time horizon into like decades, and they give you this I don't know if it's a privilege and an honor, but it's this terrifying weight of having something far more important than yourself to lose, and that like rewired my relationship to my professional career after my first child, and then Maximus, and then my second child, Aria, and then the last event was meeting the love of my life, Hillary. Uh, it's hard to say what it means to. I mean, that's just this happened when I was like, I'm I was in my early 40s. Um, it changed everything about who I was, and it changed the way I thought about the world and humanity, and even like people that I didn't like. I realized once I experienced true love, which I had not experienced prior to that. I had many relationships. They were I thought I had understood what love was. I didn't have a clue until I met her, and meeting her, I knew it was something fundamentally different for a million reasons, but it made me want happiness and goodness for people I didn't like. And I think I'm very comfortable saying I was a pretty vindictive or maybe unpleasant person when I was younger. If somebody crossed me, it was like, okay, you're on the list. And now for the people that I at the time just couldn't have possibly have stood, I wanted them to experience this because I felt like if it could change me in this way to make me somebody who wanted to see happiness and goodness in the world, it could change anybody. So those those three things were absolutely like foundational to me being the person I am now, which is a really happy and comfortable person with my life.
Okay, so let's mine these areas in a little bit more detail. So you talked about the influence of your mother, but also your father was a tech consultant. So I'm going to add that, and that would have and he enables you to have your first computer at age 5, right, with a programming guide. So that would plant some seeds. So we'll go back to that. So I just want to quickly overview. Then your chess master friend, who then was responsible for your engagement with Yonsei many years later, but you two just clicked, right? Kind of similar
Instantly.
mindsets and very creative. And then your children will all, because you said there's a kind of truth to honesty. There's a kind of transparency to kids, and like you said, there's the efficiency, and you kind of get to the bare metal in essence, and you got to speak to the truth with kids, right? Because you're shaping their future. And then Hillary, your wife, has opened up to thinking about the other and their perspective and respecting it, and not living in your world, but thinking, what's motivating their way of communication and engaging, and that's shaping you then to be much more diverse in your thinking, combinatory in your thinking. It's giving you appreciation of tech because of the early guidance that you received when you were very young. Okay, now let's go back to the very beginning.
Mhm.
You developed the passion for technology early, and your mother was very an incubator for that, and
Yeah.
and your father too, because he was a tech consultant who worked on site with clients and gave you your first computer at age 5, I believe, right? With the thick
Well,
programming guide.
he was in the gambling industry, but he consulted for the gambling industry and brought me in really early on. It gave me a love of numbers. Like I spent most of my childhood, like I grew up kind of in Atlantic City because he started out as a poker dealer, and then he started doing consulting for them because he had a flair for technology and he really
Right.
enjoyed it. And I remember sitting in the poker room at the Golden Nugget, which I don't even think exists anymore, but like city, and he'd be like looking around and like taking me with him as he's like saying, okay, well, what could we do to make it easier to detect cheating, or like what kind, if we put a camera here, just he would just think about things, right? And that thoughtfulness and those questions he would ask in that environment, which is you can imagine what that environment looked like, but all I saw was lots of numbers, lots of math everywhere, and I saw technology being deployed, we primarily, or I got a chance to spend a lot of time in the security room. So that's where he would spend a lot of his time, like designing systems that would help not just to detect cheating, but also to make operations more efficient. And that got me really excited about that. It was actually my mom though who brought me my first computer when she brought me a Wang from when she worked at Johnson and Johnson, and I think I was like 7 or so at the time, and I just remember taking it apart without asking her, and she got home from work and there was a motherboard, like there was just a computer strewn out across the living room, and I remember she said to me, she's like, okay, before I react to this, uh, either you can have this put together by the time I get back from grocery shopping, and I'll be really, really happy, or we're going to have a problem because you destroyed expensive equipment that my company loaned me so I could work at home. And I diligently got back to putting it together, and it was just that thinking, like, oh, always challenge yourself, like, look at things different, have like sort of an engineering mindset. And I think both of my parents really helped contribute to that, but probably my mom more than anyone, because she was always pushing me to try the things when so much of the world would say, yeah, that's not really for you. Even at a young age, I was very weird. So they wanted to kind of like push me into like special needs classes because I didn't interact so well with other children. My mom always like encouraged me to just be myself and to find my own path. So yeah, it really had a big impact on how I look at the world.
Okay, so I'll first go back to your dad then. So he's working in the sort of the gaming industry, and but there wouldn't be any budget limitations, right? Because really you would see any kind of technology that could advance the case, and if it can ultimately save a casino money or whatever, they'll definitely put capital behind it. So you'd have an exposure to sort of anything is possible as long as it addresses a problem with a
Mhm.
solution. And
Yeah,
it opened your mind to that. And the fact that your dad would take you around and behind the scenes and things that were your privileged access areas, that's unusual.
yeah.
And then it would open you up to the possibilities. And then your mother from Johnson Johnson. So was she working in marketing or in the science area or administration or?
Yeah, she was in like HR and did like it essentially like HR analysis and management, just trying to help employees be better. It got me really interested in human optimization because I would see little changes that she would have to make. And back then, you didn't have like any kind of real technology to help you do this, so you had to really go deep with it. So I'd sneak at night and like read her papers and like the documents that she was going through on things that were essentially precursors to things I learned later on, like total quality management or like Six Sigma. These just early on, like how do you make teams more efficient? How do you get the most out of people? How do you optimize for success? And you really hit on something important with the casino side of things. I mean, it doesn't sound like it would be, but you're exactly correct that there was no limitations on budget. And I think it reminds me of something I have to do with all of my mathematicians and the data scientists and engineers that work for me, is that I like to find them when they're really young, like 18, 19, before, while they still have creativity and are unconstrained by the reality of the world. You have to train them, as I had to be trained, to sort of constrain their thinking a little bit. Say, okay, these are real enterprise needs. You can't just, sometimes good is good enough. You don't want to let like perfect be the enemy of the good. But I'm so much happier to try to like narrow an unbounded like level of creativity than try to go the other way. And so I look for people like that because it was something in myself. I had no idea that you had to think about budgets. You could just come up with ideas. And I remember being really excited when dad and I would just sort of brainstorm on how do we do things that will, allow the casino to increase revenue. I didn't care about revenue. I barely understood what it was. It was just like a numbers game or a science problem. And I love that kind of unconstrained thinking because, as you mentioned, they didn't care what it cost. So there was never an issue like, oh, we can't afford that equipment. We would come up with ideas. Primarily him, but I would try to contribute, and he really made me a part of the process. And then a few weeks later, you would see it. or a few months later, you would see that thing operating, and it felt like you could think of an idea and then it would be made manifest, which is part of what I love about what AI can do today for people's creativity. Is you can try to put together an idea and then it can help structure and formalize and give some sense of reality to creative thought. It's wild how important that characteristic is in people, and it's something that I seek in anybody I interact with personally and ideally professionally, and it's something I try to foster in my kids, and something that is just native to my wife, which is one of the countless reasons that I'm just obsessed with her. Just I love that creative thinking.
Okay, so what happened then is your dad encouraged, he sort of talked to you like a peer because he would just share what the open problem was. And then I can see when you met your peer in the chess match where
Mhm.
there was this kind of open thinking, right? So your dad fostered open thinking from a technical standpoint because he would share the problems and then ways to address that problem with a particular solution.
Mhm.
But the ecosystem that you could draw upon was like unbounded, and then you can constrain it to that particular environment. So that's a
Yeah.
great. And then your mom, because she encouraged diversity in thinking, she would expose you. She incubated your ability to think across many different dimensions, and also because HR has to look at the dimensionality of people, the high dimensional space people exist in, and she would have to manage that. And then she's sharing some of the tools that Johnson and Johnson would have and able to manage that. And then so you would get the human connection part of that.
Mhm.
So that's a wonderful um, uh, you know background or a catalyst because they definitely didn't restrict you. They really opened you up to the possibilities. Even your mom saying, "You put that thing back together, we're going to be great." Yeah. And I'm going to go shopping
It
and
felt a little foreboding, or like there was fear involved there, but sometimes pain motivates a
right.
reaction. But yeah, absolutely.
So, and when you met Hillary, actually I could see elements of your mom in Hillary then, and I could see
Yeah.
elements of your dad in Hillary. So, and so the humanistic part, because your mom's, you learn from Hillary, don't judge other people and their means of communication. You have to think of the other and sort of, your mom would definitely look at that because she's HR, right?
Yeah,
So,
my mom absolutely loved Hillary. My mom passed a little less than a year ago, and but it was she had cancer, and we had moved her in with us from Washington State, and so we moved her to where we are now here in Vermont, and it was the best 2.5 years I'd spent with her my entire life. I was so blessed to have that opportunity, and so much of that came from Hillary because
right.
it just I like learned that like being of service to other people, like why does it feel so great when somebody else is happy for a kindness you've shown them? I would have laughed
Right.
that off in my 30s. I would have thought that is the mark of a naive person saying that kind of thing. And it's only now that I realize how idiotic I was. Like it feels good in a way that you don't feel when you, I don't know, win a business deal, or just do something that makes yourself. I mean, it's good to be selfish sometimes and do things that you want to achieve and have goals. But when you make somebody else feel happy or feel some kind of joy, it's like the math breaks, because it's like you give them joy and you get joy back. It's like not a zero sum kind of situation. Hillary is my mom should have been the one that taught me that, because I saw that in her, but I didn't have the mentality at the time to appreciate it. It was only when I saw them together every day when they were living, I was like, my goodness, I like that wonderful aspect of her I see imprinted on my wife, and it further like revitalized my desire to, I really think, to be a person more like them, more, and as I've come to know you, like think about others and care about the world around you, not because you have to, but because it's pragmatically a good thing to do. You get back so much more by helping than you do by hurting or being self-centered. And I just love that way of thinking, and wish I had adopted it sooner. And I'm glad that it has happened now and not later.
Yeah, but what happened was is your mom set up the imprint so that you can then receive Hillary later in your life, right?
Yeah.
So that sort of unconscious conditioning was already there to
Hmm.
seek that in a life partner, and
Very much
then
so. Even if I didn't know it, you're
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
so I can see how it connects, and of course you can do that with your children too, right? Because you can do unconditional service, and in
Yes.
turn enable them and their future, and then of course you can do that in your work. So all of these are important aspects of your life. Now, Ari, you excelled in science and engineering when you were young, and you achieved what, first place in the NASA's national, or did I get that right? Science
Yeah.
Olympiad.
I was just much more comfortable in that area than I was in like language or arts. It's just something that clicked with me. I actually, another thing I owe to my mom was when I remember the first like day or two of high school. I just had no interest. Like I just thought this is just not for me. It was a lot of chaotic things happening that I couldn't follow, and there was social things that were going right over my head. And I told her, I was like, I'm not even sure why I'm here. Can I do something else? And she said to me, same thing, like, if you can figure something out, I'll work with you. Like, you have to get an education, but I don't really care how you get that education. And so that's where the NASA Science Olympiad was so unbelievable, because competing in that, she's like, this might be a way for you to do something different and to stay excited and interested. I competed in that, and I took a gold medal. And one of the judges, this is somebody else who I pointed as having had a huge impact on my life, Dr. Deborah Nickerson. She was the head of the University of Washington like molecular genomics center, which was run by Dr. Leroy Hood, pioneer in DNA sequencing. And she was just like, why don't you just come? I will arrange you with the university. Why don't you come to university instead of going to high school? You can get your credits, whatever, and you can work as essentially like an intern for my postdocs in the genetics lab. And this was, if you could pick a dream for me, this was a better dream than any dream I could have come up with as a child. And so I spent 2 years working, like living at the University of Washington, doing like class and stuff like that there. But my focus was going to lab and doing like PCR, like polymerase chain reactions, and like oligoligation assays and ELISA tests. And like I was just loving doing all this work. And she would just throw new weird problems at me, like the Stanford auto pipetting machine needed to be programmed. And that's how I got exposure to to coding, because like none of the postdocs wanted to say, they're like, hey kid, do this. And so I read through this book, and I got to program this machine that would move sample into these these like would pipette automatically. And it was from there that I was like, oh yeah, I'm like, you don't have to think about things in the traditional path. So I never really went to high school. Just a couple of days. I didn't go to high school. I didn't graduate from high school. I just went to University of Washington, and then transferred to MIT. I think it was like 16 or 17 when I realized, after I did that project with the robotics machine, because like, oh wow, like computational science is amazing. So I started with like looking at the bioinformatics angle, like MD PhD between Harvard and MIT. But then I just like, yeah, computer science is really where I want to focus, because you can just do so much with it. Yeah, not thinking in a normal way allowed me to do unusual things, and I credit both of my parents and Dennis that, because he joined me at the University of Washington because he had also been very high achieving. And so we were able to like collaborate. We, you have like a little den mother, because they don't want underage kids like drinking like the other college kids and stuff like that. And so yeah, I credit all of these people, Dr. Nickerson, Dennis, my mom and my dad, for I think giving me the courage to be different and to try to
Yeah,
move through my life differently.
yeah, I guess too, though, it's like if you follow people who have a tech tendency that sometimes there could be kind of like an arrogance when you're very good at math or sciences, and you kind of think that, or I see it anyways, people think they're elite, and they think people who have struggles in those areas that are well, they're not as good or they're not as elite, but they could be so much better in other areas, or their understanding of nature or connectivity, or maybe the spiritual aspects. I mean, there's so many aspects to knowing, right? Like a million dimensions. And so I could see how you're sort of imprinting from your mom, but then you're Hillary kind of balancing out this because you're talented in the math and science, isn't to say, like hold back here. You got to accept people for all the different perspectives they come, because you went from first place at NASA Science Olympiad. You got exposure to molecular genetics at the University of Washington. You did multidisciplinary studies, and then you transferred to MIT, where you're in a degree in computing science, and where you were able to blend your interest in biology and computing, and then take your first steps into entrepreneurship, because you were a semifinalist at what MIT's prestigious 100K entrepreneurship competition.
Yeah, I'm
And
old enough that it was called the 50K competition back then, but um, I'm probably the least credentialed person actually to ever participate in that, because I didn't have a high school diploma. As it turns out, you didn't really need one. They just they just interviewed you and looked at your other academic achievements. And but this my senior year, when I did the 50K competition, we got to the semifinals, and one of the groups that watched that was out of like the Citicorp building, like an investment fund there. They said, hey, listen, do you and your buddies want to start this company right now? And I was like, sure, I'll take a leave of absence and go ahead and do that. And you know, 3 something years later, it was invested, we built it up, and then we ended up selling. It was after 9/11 where things changed a lot. We were based out of New York, and but yeah, that was a huge pivot point, like that entrepreneurship competition, because it moved me into a different world where I was able to see change affected at a pretty significant scale.
yeah, so 92 to 94, University of Washington, molecular genetics, then computer science, 94 to 98. You end up in this MIT 50K at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I guess it's 100K now. And you get this entrepreneurship side, and you realize the value of that. And then after graduating from MIT in 1999, you co-found your first company, AlertWire, a software startup that was born out of MIT tech ecosystem, when you served as its CTO and led this venture through its early growth. And then you got the attention of major industry players, and you successfully built the company at point of acquisition. And you got bought out by a Microsoft subsidiary and
Mm-hmm.
a few years later. And so that's a really great lesson about innovation scale, adaptability in a tech startup.
No,
And
mild
then,
correction. I finished my degree requirements, but I took a leave of absence and I have not yet gone back. I didn't graduate from high school or from MIT. It was my senior year. I was like, okay, I got to go start this company up now. So that's something else my mom and Dennis were like, just do whatever is going to make you happy. Don't worry about like those kind of things. And turned out it didn't really seem to matter too much. But yeah, I just wanted to be completely transparent on that.
okay, well, I mean, starting a company and selling it's even better, right? I mean, that,
Certainly on a
I,
number of different from a number of different vectors, yes.
yeah, I mean, that's a graduation and more, because a lot of people who, I mean, that's a point of achievement, right? Can you apply the knowledge in a practical way, build something that's of value to the broader system, and you prove that.
Yeah.
And then you joined Microsoft, right, as a solutions architect, until what,
They
about
rolled
2005?
Yeah, around yeah, they well, it's around 2002, and then from 2002 to 2005 is when I worked for them. You have to wait for your options to vest when there's like during those kind of
Right.
positions. So they had assigned me to be the solutions architect over what was their largest account globally at the time, which was Verizon. And they only put a young kid like me on it because Verizon had very technical executives and the sales guys had a lot of trouble speaking to them. So I was left in Manhattan, where Verizon's like headquarters was, and worked out of Microsoft's New York office. And that gave me my first exposure to enterprise AI. And once I hit that, I was like, that is my future. I was absolutely sold on. Once I got to do my first AI project, I knew that would be like I don't know, a calling, but it was going to be what I wanted to do with my life and how I wanted to build my career.
Okay, so Microsoft is especially in those days, 2002, 2005, a very demanding environment. It's under Satya, it's probably a little bit more not more humanistic.
I was
Back in those,
war back then, like they did not tolerate a lot of foolishness.
yeah, I mean, you definitely have to deliver, and it's a kind of a demanding job, right? So.
Yeah.
And you were designing and implementing enterprise solutions with the Verizon, which is a major it's a major company, right? And um, uh, now, did you get some patents there as well when you were there?
So I actually I had written like 13 different patents for our startup, but when Microsoft acquired us, they kind of shelved those. The acquisition was probably not what I would have like would have wanted, because you come from MIT at the time. It was like the birthplace of open source, and you go to like the most closed source company in the world. That wasn't like the plan. They shelved most of it, but one piece of our technology related to active sync, and so that was really what they were focused on. I picked up some patents later on when I was doing a project with a transportation company, American Express, and that sort of introduced me to, I guess, the role of intellectual property, and I think the importance of ideation, and how one goes about protecting your ideas, and at the same time enabling others to leverage them.
So in 2005, then I believe you took on a leadership role at MR Financial, right? And
Yeah, I was still I could start learning. I wanted to learn how to consult. I knew I wanted to start an AI company, but I needed to gain some professional skills. I had gotten an executive MBA. Microsoft wanted me to know what I was talking about when I was talking to these salespeople, or when I was trying to help the salespeople on my team deliver solutions to Verizon. So they put me through this like executive MBA thing. But I wanted to get some more practical experience, and I was able to do that with MR Financial, where I ended up consulting with like major companies like AVL, in Austria, and a number of others. And that was a great experience too, because I got more exposure to the world. I lived in Graz and in Vienna during key portions of that work effort, and that's what that work effort and the initiatives I was able to spearhead there. That's what really kind of helped shape the way I was going to build my tech company.
Yeah, so you get banking and financial systems experience, and then you form another company. Now, how do you pronounce it? Is it Aridan or Aridan or?
Actually, FatRat and Arid are the same thing. We just ended up rebranding, because my it was my daughter actually suggested the name when years ago, and we liked it, so we said rebrand. But Aridan it was really the same thing. It was just that was the data sciences company I wanted to form, and that name just came from myself and Dennis combining the first three letters of our name. But since Ariden was taken, we just intentionally misspelled my name Eriden, and yeah, not the most thoughtful branding strategy, but Dennis and I wanted to start something, so that's what we did.
I see. So it's really like Aridan.
Yeah,
Ari,
it,
right?
it's just like my own name. It has been perpetually mispronounced, because if you were pronounced the way it's spelled, it's not the way I pronounce it. So, like I said, I was very
Right.
STEM focused, not so much on English and grammar. So there you go.
Yeah, so you're specialized in developing financial, like machine learning systems for clients across finance, automotive, manufacturing sectors.
Started in finance, and then it broadened into everything military. Like we've done work for the military, and supply chain systems, and we really had this weird thesis that we can just let's just I found this phenomenal group of mathematicians, like international Olympiad champions, and I basically sponsored the whole team. And essentially my business model was, let me just go speak at conferences and tell people if they have problems that are not being solved by their current vendors, if a problem that they're not sure how to solve, like we'll take the unsolvable problems and we'll solve them somehow. So I just kind of put us in that crucible fire. But because the people that I brought into the company, like those Olympiad, they're used to these crazy problem sets where you just have like super high pressure. It's the world I come from. Like those Olympiads are no joke. They will throw the hardest kind of problems at you, and you don't have a lot of luxury to, like, in terms of time or resources. You just have to think through a solution. So that's how I wanted my company to focus. It was like, just give us any problem that you think can't be solved, and see how we move. And that's how we ended up. It was like my shortcut to getting in with the Fortune 500, because they all had problems. I would always say, if we don't solve it, you don't pay us anything. And I did that in a very dumb way many times, because I didn't even know what the problem was. Sometimes they just tell us, hey, we want to bring you on, but it's super secret. And that's actually what happened with Foxconn. They couldn't tell me about the project before I had to sign all the details, but I just wanted to work with them and Apple so much. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take it on and risk that opportunity, or risk that capital to just to get in a foot in the door with like an amazing group like that.
And then you did a stint at FinCross International, right? Or
That
not?
was I was still running FatRat at the time, but I wanted to get more exposure to this sort of world of crypto. So I took that project on as a CTO, or I guess a VCTO, fractional CTO, essentially so that I could really get familiar with this world of not just because I'd done finance work, but I hadn't done any kind of project. Like, this was like a heterogeneous, like, fiat slash cryptocurrency banking engine. And that allowed me to push into a lot of areas. It's actually kind of how I navigated my business. Like, most of the time I think, what's a new cool area that's going to like really add to our professional skills and our credentials. And so I take on new projects in so many different areas so that I at least had good exposure to things that I probably otherwise would never have looked into or even touched upon.
Yeah, so you're exploring the application of AI and blockchain and banking, and further solidified your reputation in the industry and showed your ability, but your team's ability across disciplinary tech, right? So now throughout this period, you continued to win accolades, right? Then in 2017, you led a team that won an award of some sort at Shanghai.
Yeah, that they like their Geek Park International AI Challenge. That was the most fun competition. You can imagine, like, Shanghai knows how to throw a competition. Like, it almost seemed like a concert, honestly. It was wildly fun. And I loved everything about it. We basically had to design a virtual assistant in like a couple of hours. And so that was what I had, my team and I were able to be successful in doing. We're competing against teams from all over the world again. So high pressure, the kind of thing that I always loved. And just that kind of stress is like positive stress to me, if there is such a thing. It wasn't cool, or the opposite of cortisol was that it was like a serotonin like infusion when you have this kind of challenge, and it's like, okay, it's just like you and your people against the world kind of thing. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. It also made sure that I was like kind of keeping my skills current, because when you rise and suddenly have these, I mean, unbelievably talented people working for me, much smarter than I am, and you don't want to be too far away from what they're doing, because then you sort of, the Peter principle like can apply. So you want to make sure that your team and you yourself are confident that you're somewhat cutting edge. And so that's something I've tried to do even as I've gotten older, and you know refocus a lot of my energies and my life on my family, and and securing their future in an increasingly chaotic and uncertain world. Which I think a prior guest of yours, who I'm a huge admirer of, Jeffrey Hinton, the things he speaks to about the future are absolutely things that I align with. And there's a lot of dystopian and things to consider there. But even as I focus more of my time and energy on making sure I maximize the value of the time with my family because of how uncertain I think the future is, I still try to make sure that my skills are relatively fresh, because I also think that keeps you younger and kind of excited and engaged with the work you're doing.
Yeah, and then towards the end of that decade, you started visiting professor of artificial intelligence at Yonsei University, and that ties to your childhood friend, right?
Yeah,
Your chess competitor.
yeah.
Yeah.
But after chess computers like came out, I never was interested in chess again. Once computers did, I was almost going to get interested in Go, and then boom, they had to go and ruin that too. But yeah, he brought me over to Seoul to tour the campus. They were looking for at the time they were looking for somebody who had some practical experience and could was could teach the kids. And I loved teaching. I mean, my goodness. COVID put I ended up going on sabbatical. I guess technically I'm still on sabbatical. I went on sabbatical during COVID, but I and did one remote set semester. But I absolutely adored teaching. I loved seeing kids just like they were so interested, and you could see that energy, and you remember things about yourself that you didn't even know at the time. It's like, oh wow, when you get interested in an idea and you're like 22 and you're working on your PhD, like the world can just narrow and you can be so hyper focused, and they would ask such insightful questions. It was like playing. I don't even that was there was nowhere I would have done that for nothing. It was just absolutely lovely. And Yonsei is it's an amazing place for creativity and growth. I got to do actually business came out of that. I ended up working with Google South Korea and Amazon South Korea, and did end up doing work with Samsung because they all sponsored the AI entrepreneurship competition that I ran at Yonsei. It was so much fun. Yeah, that was a great time.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I didn't know the connection, but now, you indicated that Aridan is really Fat Rat, right? Because now
I just
it's,
renamed it. Yeah.
yeah, so it really is FatRat.ai, and you're a co-founder and AI development and consulting firm, chief technology officer, and then very much spearheading agentic AI architectures, autonomous decision making, leveraging, initiatives in automation, logistics, and large scale driven analytics. And as you mentioned, sometimes you're brought in to solve a problem, like Foxconn, where you come in and you develop a really creative solution because you pull from, like you said, math Olympiad finalists or winners or people who come from really solving very difficult problems, because that mindset can then be used to like you said, you start with a broad mindset and then you could narrow it, you could hone it,
Mhm.
depending on the particular problem you want to address, which is what happened when you were very young too. You learn this aspect that the sky's the limit, but then you have to address to a particular solution. And that's
Mhm.
probably the DeepSeek mindset, right? When DeepSeek disrupted the world, it wasn't that long ago. It's actually this year and late last year that DeepSeek became on the radar screen, right? So,
It
and
feels like
and
a lifetime ago, but you're right. It was so recent.
yeah, but they hire university kids, right? Because they don't want this. They want an unfettered, anything is
Calcified.
possible. Yeah, yeah, exactly. They don't want to put constraints, and then they can add the constraints later, right? So,
Yes.
and I could see and you were doing that decades before with Fat Rat, right? Or the original piece
I
with Fat
didn't even
Rat.
know that. Like, I think it's very safe to say that I accidentally got very fortunate in that I like looking at multiple. Like, I think a multidisciplinary approach to thinking is one of the is going to be let's say a persistent like value add or strategic advantage for people, because being super deep in one area, which is what I kind of thought you were supposed to do back then, even though I didn't do it because I just had a lot of interest. I think that is actually an area where humans will continue to add value, regardless as we march possibly towards AGI, or at least towards increasingly sophisticated narrow models that can do so much. I think our ability as humans to ideate across disciplines is going to be an increasingly useful capability. And certainly with Foxconn, that was, as it turns out, my head of AI, who was also Macedonia's national math champion and the captain of that AI team decades ago that I brought on, he was also Macedonia's like a chemistry champion. So, and it turned out it was a chemistry problem. We had to sort of reverse engineer a process that related to how they make the iPhone screens, because the individual who was the expert in that had died unexpectedly and had not documented his process. So they had hundreds of millions of dollars investment in equipment that nobody really knew how to use. That was exactly the kind of chaotic problem where you needed to understand physics, chemistry, mathematics, computational science, mechanical engineering, and amongst our team we had and have increasingly have people who just have all these great extra skills. So it's like you look for the people who are talented in what you need, but when they have these other, like the hobbies and interests are so important to me, because that more than often than not, whether it's direct or indirect, really informs how valuable they're going to be when the bounds of the scope of your project, as they inevitably do, move past the original expectations. You want people who can think multidimensionally, who are quick on their feet, can come up with clever solutions. And I find that the best way to select for that capability is to tap into folks who are not so narrow in one topical area. Although I'm sure in many situations that is extremely helpful. But for me, I just love people who have a lot of unusual skills that don't even have to seem related, because it just sort of relates to how their mental map of things gets constructed. And it's interesting to, and a pleasure to see how different people with that kind of mindset think, and how they construct the problems, which is the answers are actually tend to be easier when you figure out the right way to structure the problem. And that's, I think, becoming increasingly important with AI, is like knowing how to ask the problem right. You have infinite information in these oracles, but if you can't structure your problem in the right way, then you can get infinite information back that is not relevant to your actual solution. So I think that learning how to structure problems and learning how to learn is by far the most useful skill that one can have in today's world. And I just, like I said, I sort of bubbled into that because I couldn't settle down and focus on one area, and it just ended up becoming a useful capability and characteristic for me to look for in others.
Yeah, I mean, we're down to our last maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and but I just want to make sure that we, get this on the radar screen. And Hyperion Labs, you have basically this AI SWAT team, and you're a co-founder, right?
Mhm.
A strategic consultant, research and development lab on advanced technology of
Mhm.
AI ventures. And you talk about Foxconn, so you really meant to look at really complex problems and bring different approaches, because under your world-class team, you've got like data scientists, mathematicians, technologists, and you employ a unique revenue sharing equity-based partnership model. So you're aligning the incentives with the client success, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah.
And you've developed high-performance solutions across fintech, energy, telecommunications, digital media, precision medicine,
Mhm.
integrated machine learning, predictive analytics into mission critical operations. And you did a financing deal with Applied Real Intelligence, right? A venture
Mhm.
fund, I believe, to accelerate growth. And you and your co-founders have played next generation AI models, enterprise software solutions. You're really executing on your innovation roadmap to bring AI solutions to everybody at an unprecedented pace. And because you hire based on the ability to solve complex problems, this kind of ability to be unbounded, and then you can constrain it to the particular solution required,
Mhm.
then makes you a top tier sought after partner, basically because of your unique revenue model you have. That kind of capture, and what maybe an under minute follow on do you want to add to Hyperion Labs that I didn't
Yeah.
cover in my summary?
So I guess briefly, you nailed the sum absolutely. Hyperion Labs is special for probably one of the reasons. Like my dear friend and co-founder Michael Spanos, um, we built this model together so that we could do more than just like do interesting projects and win deals. Like it allows us to collaborate in a way that both of us care about service and being of service to others and like helping people. And the structure of Hyperion Labs and now of FatRat allow, because they work hand in hand. FatRat has a team. Hyperion Labs is like the business development entity that finds all the great opportunities and like kind of manages and fosters them. But like for example, I'm with the work that we do, I'm able to help. Like I'm on the executive board for a group called Global Voices for Autism, and I'm able to help them with our team. And my partners are happy for me to donate resources to help like nonprofits. They're helping humanitarians and humanitarian causes related to like neurodivergent folks and whatnot. And working with people like that, and being able to work with like this gentleman Amit Ashok. He's this wonderful leader of this real estate firm, but he's looking to bring like first order capabilities, smart technology to low cost housing initiatives that he's working on, which is I just think is absolutely beautiful. Dr. Jeffries, like the Hyperion's able to work with a group with him who's starting like a totally new type of venture approach where he's able to build and invest in systems that that are designed to be rapidly reused and recombined and adapted to new business models as disruption just becomes part of the norm. This is what Hyperion really is about. Is like being able to work with truly diverse types of groups in ways that allow us to realize our goals of being of service while running a successful business.
Yeah, and excuse me, and you're definitely in the fusion of tech and hospitality. You got
Mhm.
your wife Hillary, who's an accomplished hospitality entrepreneur, and
Yeah,
you fuse your tech background with her eco-friendly hospitality mindset. You've co-founding Balance Farms, I believe, and
yeah, that's our passion project. We bought 500 about 550 acres here in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, and we're building like a next generation, like sort of luxury, high tech, off grid micro community, which is just going to be designed to like cater to people. Like I said, I love it when people are happy, and we're trying to provide the most organic experiences here, and we're building this as a template for how micro communities in the future can be developed in a wide variety of rural areas, which I think currently are being sort of ignored by the tech revolution. But I want to bring technology to the people in places that don't get to experience it, and I want to be able to enable others to have those kind of authentic experiences on our property and within nature in a way that sort of takes advantage of the hyper personalization that you can get from AI and the automation and robotics you do, but in a way that's totally invisible. So you don't feel that. So you can connect with nature. We get a lot of like writers and like CEOs and people, thought leaders who just want to like escape and have time to think, but they need to be on Fiverr and doing, video conferences. And then as soon as that's over, they want to shut it off and then go for a hike or, jump on the snowboard or go ATVing or whatnot. So this is what we're doing here, and it's become a real passion project of mine. And it's what my wife is focused on building out.
yeah, so hand-on experimentation from hydroponic gardens. They use AI to maximize crop yields, the hidden IoT sensors
Mm-hmm.
embedded around the property that monitor everything from energy usage to wildlife activity, but it's all seamless. You created a small smart environment that can respond to guests in real time, right? Including lighting and temperature and things like that. As you mentioned, a hyper-personalized experience that is really tailored to each one of your guests, optimizing wellness and meals from the on-site organic farms to adjusting the uh, ambience of the individual cabins, all informed by data and AI insights and blending nature and thoughtful design, cutting edge innovation, very future forward philosophy. You do a lot of thought leadership, conferences, things like that. And
Yeah.
you speak in this area. You built AI-driven companions to help in terms of cognitive state modeling, etc. You
Yeah.
mentioned your philanthropy and community involvement in terms of a global voice for autism, a nonprofit organization equipping conflict-affected communities with tools to support children. And the charity underscores its commitment to leveraging the skills and influence of social good, etc. I mean, it
Yeah.
just a remarkable background. We only literally have maybe 90 seconds. Can you give me one recommendation you want to leave the audience? And then two, can you give me one or two questions you want to leave the audience? And if you want to update your profile, please do so by providing links to all the different resources that you created over your
Sure.
lifetime and you're continuing to create, including the different operations you're doing and things like that, so that people don't have to hunt for it. It's in one spot. If it's not already in your profile. Okay, now to the last two questions.
Okay.
Recommendation and then maybe one or two questions people should ponder.
So I think this can all be sort of refactored around one central idea, which is education. Um, the First of all, thinking the education that we had as children, that's gone. If you have children, then you need to be thinking about education in a radically different way, where it's not about memorization. It's about like orchestration, like understanding how to navigate and ask the right questions, like I mentioned earlier, of AI. Assume that you'll have these AI superpowers and that kids are going to be taught with these AI tutors that are hyper focused on them. And think about what the future for that generation and generations beyond, what that means for them and the world, and for yourselves. Realize that the world is changing so rapidly that you always have to be in a state of learning. Like every human, no matter how 8 to 80, has to be a student forever. Like it's not just something that it helps with, like neuroplasticity, all the reasons that one might normally give. Like it is genuinely a requirement. If you want to remain remotely competitive and connected to the world, you have to always be learning and staying on top of what's going on, and at least getting roll up summaries of the unbelievable change that AI and robotics and automation are bringing to the world, because that is like the foundation upon which all the other revolutions in like longevity and energy and climate and everything is being driven by that. So you have to always be learning, and it's something that you should be excited about, because it means that you're never too old to bring value. And I think that that's what I would leave with.
Okay, so Ari, we're going to leave it at that. I really appreciate you coming in, sharing all your wisdom and insights and resources with the audience, and you're going to update the profile with more resources that they can use. So I really appreciate you coming in and doing this hour with me.
Truly a pleasure, Stephen. Anytime.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.